In the Sacred Mountains of Arizona Territory, 1879, 8-year-old Morning Feather ventures beyond her tribe's boundaries, drawn by something calling her name on the wind. Against the fading sunset, she discovers what no Apache has dared approach for generations. A stone tower rising from Whisper Hill, its surface unmarked by time. The elders spoke only in hushed tones about this place, warning children to look away if they ever glimpsed its silhouette against the sky. But Morning Feather doesn't look away. The heavy wooden door swings open at her touch, revealing spiraling stairs ascending into darkness. Inside, the air turns cold enough to see her breath even in summer heat. Strange markings pulse with faint blue light as she climbs higher, while shadows move against the walls without source. What ancient evil has been waiting in that tower for centuries? What she discovers at the top doesn't just terrify her, it marks her soul forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Apache settlement awakened with the dawn. Smoke rising from cooking fires into the crisp morning air. Morning Feather sat cross-legged outside her family's wickiup, small fingers working deftly as she strung colorful beads onto a piece of sinew. Her grandfather, Chief Running Wolf, watched her with weathered eyes that had witnessed 80 summers. "Your hands move like water over stones. Little one," he said, his voice carrying the gentle rasp of age. "What are you making this time?" Morning Feather held up a small leather pouch decorated with porcupine quills, dyed vibrant red and yellow. "A medicine bag," she answered, pride evident in her voice. "2 ravens showed me how to stitch the hide." Running Wolf nodded approvingly. "A good skill. What will you keep inside?" "Things that have power," she replied simply, reaching into her pocket to produce a hawk feather, a smooth river stone, and a piece of turquoise. From across the settlement, Laughing Brook called out, her voice carrying on the wind. "Morning Feather, come help with the gathering." Running Wolf chuckled. "Go, the medicine bag will wait." The girls moved through golden grass toward the creek, woven baskets swinging at their sides. Morning Feather always walked slightly ahead, her eyes constantly drawn to the horizon. "You're going too fast again," Laughing Brook complained, adjusting her basket. "The berries aren't running away." "I want to see what's beyond that ridge," Morning Feather pointed northward, where distant hills rose in purple shadows. Laughing Brook's expression darkened. "My father says we shouldn't look at those hills, especially the one that stands alone." "Whisper Hill?" Morning Feather whispered, the name itself seeming to carry on the breeze. "You shouldn't even say its name." Laughing Brook hissed, glancing nervously over her shoulder. Later that afternoon, Morning Feather sat beside her grandfather as he addressed the Council of Elders. Though children weren't usually permitted, Running Wolf insisted his granddaughter learn the old ways. "The signs are troubling." 2 ravens, the tribe's medicine man, spoke in measured tones. His face, lined with experience and painted with ceremonial ochre, reflected firelight as the day waned. 3 goats missing from White Rock settlement. The creek water running cloudy when no rain has fallen. "And the birds, what about the birds?" Running Wolf prompted. "They circle Whisper Hill but never land," 2 ravens replied. Like in the old stories, the elders exchanged uncomfortable glances. Morning Feather leaned forward, fascinated. "Perhaps it is time to move our settlement," suggested Grey Hawk, a hunter known for his caution. "Before the cold moons come," Running Wolf shook his head firmly. "This has been our home for generations. We will not abandon it without cause." As darkness fell, Morning Feather helped her mother, Silent Dove, prepare the evening meal. The woman worked efficiently, her movements practiced from years of routine, but her eyes repeatedly drifted northward. "Mother, why does everyone fear the northern hills?" Morning Feather asked, passing a clay pot of water. Silent Dove paused, studying her daughter. "Some places are not meant for people," she finally answered. "Some places hold old spirits." That night, Morning Feather couldn't sleep. Moonlight filtered through the wickiup's smoke hole, casting strange shadows. Outside, she heard the adults still talking in hushed tones. "Just like before my father's time," Running Wolf was saying. "The signs are the same." The white trader Blackwood mentioned cattle acting strangely at the Marshall Ranch, 2 ravens replied. "They refuse to face north, even to graze." Morning Feather slipped outside, careful to stay in the shadows. The night air carried a peculiar chill, despite the summer season. In the distance, Whisper Hill was a dark silhouette against the star-filled sky. Something glinted in the dirt by her feet. Morning Feather reached down, fingers closing around a small, perfectly smooth black stone. It felt unnaturally warm against her palm, and for a moment, just a moment, she thought she heard her name, whispered as if from far away. She should have shown it to her grandfather immediately. She should have given it to 2 ravens to examine. Instead, Morning Feather slipped the stone into her new medicine pouch and tied it securely around her waist. Beneath her dress, that night, she dreamed of a tower on a hill waiting for her, calling her name on the wind. Morning Feather awoke with the strange black stone clutched in her hand, though she clearly remembered placing it in her medicine pouch before sleeping. Its surface gleamed unnaturally in the dawn light, reflecting nothing yet somehow containing depths. "Grandfather," she said, approaching Running Wolf as he performed his morning prayers. "Look what I found." The old chief's weathered hand froze mid-motion when she extended her palm. The color drained from his face. "Where did you get this?" His voice trembled, something Morning Feather had never heard before. "By our wiki-up last night. It was just lying there." She tilted her head curiously. "Do you know what it is?" Running Wolf closed her fingers over the stone. "Keep it hidden," he whispered, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Show no one else." Later, as they walked alone along the creek, Running Wolf revealed a story he had never shared. "When I was a young man, before becoming chief," he began, his voice low, "I too found such a stone. And like you, I felt drawn to Whisper Hill." Morning Feather's eyes widened. "You went there?" "I approached the tower that stands upon it. Yes, there is a tower, though we speak not of it." His gaze turned distant. "The door opened for me as though it had been waiting. Inside," he shuddered. "Inside was cold beyond any winter and darkness that moved like a living thing." "What happened?" "I fled," he admitted. "And for 3 days afterward, my dreams were filled with voices offering power and knowledge. On the 4th day, the stone vanished from my possession. I believed it a blessing from the ancestors, that I had been tested and spared." The sound of approaching hoofbeats interrupted them. Thomas Blackwood, the half-Apache trader who moved between worlds, guided his paint horse toward them. His face, tanned from years under the southwestern sun, bore the distinctive features of both his Apache mother and white father. "Running Wolf," he greeted respectfully. "I bring news and supplies," the chief nodded. "What news, Blackwood?" "Strange happenings at White Rock Settlement," the trader reported as he dismounted. "Animals gone missing, water sources failing. The settlers blame each other, but—" He glanced toward Whisper Hill. "There are older forces at work, I think." That evening, Blackwood joined the tribal council, bringing a bottle of whiskey that only the elders shared. As the fire burned low and tongues loosened, talk turned to old legends. "My mother spoke of the long night," Blackwood said, his voice dropping to match the hushed tones of the others. "When darkness fell for many days and things walked abroad that should remain hidden." 2 ravens nodded solemnly. "It is our oldest story. Before the Apache, before even the ancient ones who built cliff dwellings, when the sky turned black at midday and stayed so for 13 days. Morning Feather, listening from the shadows, felt the stone pulse warmly against her skin. She had hidden it in her medicine pouch as her grandfather instructed, yet somehow felt it responding to the conversation. That night her dreams changed. She saw the tower on Whisper Hill clearly, as though standing before it. Its stones were impossibly smooth, rising into darkness, with strange symbols etched around a massive wooden door. In the dream, the door swung open, revealing spiraling stairs. A voice called her name echoing from above. She awoke standing outside her family's wickiup, the cool night air raising goosebumps on her arms. She had no memory of leaving her sleeping mat. The stone in her pouch burned hot against her hip. The next day, she noticed Laughing Brook watching her with concern. "You look tired," her friend said, as they collected kindling. "And you keep staring toward those hills." "I'm fine," Morning Feather insisted, though she felt a constant pull northward. Like an invisible thread tugging at her heart, Blackwood found her alone that afternoon. "Your grandfather is worried about you," he said without preamble. "He asked me what I know of the tower." Morning Feather's breath caught. "What did you tell him?" "That the Spanish wrote of it in their earliest explorations. That they believed it predated even the oldest native civilizations." He studied her face carefully. "And that those who enter rarely return unchanged, if they return at all." Running Wolf watched his granddaughter with growing concern. Dark circles shadowed her eyes, and she moved as if in a perpetual daze, her gaze constantly drawn northward. After finding her standing outside the settlement before dawn for the third consecutive morning, he sought out 2 ravens. The medicine man's dwelling stood apart from the others, marked by bundles of herbs hanging from the entrance and the skulls of small animals arranged in patterns only he understood. Inside, the air hung heavy with sage smoke and the earthy scent of dried roots. "She has found a stone," Running Wolf said without preamble, settling across from 2 ravens. "Like the one I encountered as a young man." 2 ravens closed his eyes. "I feared this day would come." The cycle begins again. From a wooden chest adorned with intricate carvings, the medicine man withdrew a rolled piece of hide, brittle with age. He carefully spread it on the ground between them, weighing the corners with stones. "This map was made by my grandfather's grandfather," 2 ravens explained. "It shows the sacred places of our people and the forbidden ones." Running Wolf examined the faded markings. The territory was recognizable despite the passing years. The mountain ridge to the west, the great river to the east. And there, marked with a spiral symbol and surrounded by warning marks, stood Whisper Hill. "There is more," 2 ravens said, pointing to symbols Running Wolf had never seen. "The tower was not built by human hands. It appears and disappears across many generations. My ancestors recorded 3 visitations before this one. Outside, the normal sounds of the settlement were punctuated by angry voices. Blackwood had returned, accompanied by a white man in dusty clothes. "This is Marshall," Blackwood explained as Running Wolf emerged. "His ranch borders your northern hunting grounds." The rancher twisted his hat in rough hands. "Someone's been rustling cattle," he began, then stopped, noticing the curious faces gathered around them. "But that ain't why I came. There's something wrong with the land up by that solitary hill. Animals won't go near it. Grass is dying in a circle around it, and you think we are responsible?" Running Wolf asked calmly. "No," Marshall shook his head. "I think we're both in trouble. My wife's been having nightmares. The children too. Always about a tower." 2 ravens and Running Wolf exchanged glances. The rancher had just confirmed their worst fears. As the adults spoke, Morning Feather slipped away, drawn by an overwhelming urge to visit her favorite viewing spot, a low rise from which she could see Whisper Hill in the distance. Laughing Brook followed reluctantly. "You shouldn't keep coming here," Laughing Brook cautioned. "Everyone's talking about how strangely you've been acting." Morning Feather barely heard her. The stone in her medicine pouch pulsed warmly, almost like a heartbeat. Through squinted eyes, she could almost see a faint path of light stretching from where she stood directly to the hill. "Do you see it?" she whispered. "See what?" Laughing Brook asked, fear evident in her voice. Morning Feather didn't answer. The hill seemed closer somehow, the tower atop it more distinct despite the distance. She could make out its smooth sides, the strange symbols etched around what must be a door. That evening, Running Wolf called for a tribal council. Morning Feather watched from her designated place as her grandfather addressed the gathered elders. "Marshall's report confirms what we already suspected. The old power in the north has awakened." Running Wolf's voice carried authority, despite his evident concern. "2 ravens has consulted the ancient map. This has happened before. 3 generations ago," 2 ravens added, "when my grandfather was a boy, and 3 generations before that. The cycle repeats. What cycle? Greyhawk asked. The tower appears. Children dream of it. Animals avoid it. Then comes the long night, two ravens explained grimly, unless the cycle is broken. From the shadows, Morning Feather listened intently, the stone now burning against her skin. She knew with inexplicable certainty that she was meant to go to the tower. Not just meant to, required to. Later, as the fire burned low and the settlement slept, she carefully packed a small bag, dried meat, a water skin, flint for fire. Her hand hesitated over her grandfather's prized eagle feather, used in his most sacred ceremonies. I'll return it, she whispered to the sleeping form of Running Wolf. I promise. In the silvery moonlight, she slipped the feather into her bag and moved silently toward the northern hills, the whispering stone guiding her every step. Dawn broke over the settlement as drums announced the beginning of the summer blessing ceremony. Tribespeople gathered in their finest attire, adorned with turquoise and silver, feathers and beads. Running Wolf, resplendent in a headdress passed down through generations, led the procession to the ceremonial grounds. Two ravens moved among them, burning sage in a clay bowl, blessing each family as they passed. The rhythmic chanting rose with the morning sun, creating the perfect cover for Morning Feather's departure. She moved swiftly through the sagebrush, her small form soon swallowed by the rolling landscape. The stone in her medicine pouch pulsed with increasing warmth the farther north she traveled. When she paused to drink from her water skin, she noticed the eagle feather she'd taken from her grandfather seemed to tremble slightly, its barbs separating and rejoining as if stirred by an unfelt breeze. Grandfather says you have power, she whispered to the feather. Protect me on this journey. The landscape changed subtly as she approached Whisper Hill. Vegetation grew sparse, then withered. The usual desert wildlife, lizards, jackrabbits, birds, vanished. The silence felt unnatural, pressing against her ears like physical weight. A set of tracks caught her attention, wide, claw-like impressions pressed deeply into the hard soil. They resembled no animal she recognized, each print larger than her head, forming a path that circled the hill before disappearing. The stone grew hotter still, almost burning against her hip. Morning Feather winced, considered discarding it, but some compulsion stayed her hand. Instead, she took the eagle feather and pressed it against the pouch. The heat subsided immediately. By midday, she stood in the shadow of Whisper Hill. From a distance, the tower had seemed modest in size. Now, standing at its base, she marveled at its impossible height. Smooth stone blocks, fitted so perfectly not even a blade of grass could pass between them, rose toward the cloudless sky. No mortar joined them, yet they had clearly stood for countless generations. Around the base, strange symbols had been carved, or perhaps they had simply appeared, for they seemed to shift slightly when viewed from the corner of her eye. Morning Feather recognized elements of Apache pictographs, but intermixed with unknown forms that made her eyes water when she tried to follow their patterns. The door stood twice the height of a man, made of wood that should have weathered to dust centuries ago, yet remained solid and unmarked by time. More symbols adorned its surface, these clearly a warning. Even without understanding their specific meaning, their intent was unmistakable. Enter at your peril. Morning Feather touched the eagle feather for reassurance. It vibrated against her fingertips, almost humming with energy. The stone in her pouch responded in kind, creating a harmonic sensation that traveled up her arm and resonated in her chest. I am Morning Feather, granddaughter of Running Wolf, she announced to the silent tower, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. I have come because you called me. The massive door swung inward without a sound, revealing darkness so complete it seemed solid. Cold air rushed outward, carrying the scent of time and dust and something else, something ancient and patient. Back at the settlement, the celebration continued until Running Wolf sought his granddaughter for the blessing of the children. His cry of alarm cut through the drumming and chanting. Morning Feather is gone. The ceremony dissolved into chaos. Silent Dove collapsed in grief, while others formed search parties. Running Wolf found the empty space where his eagle feather had been kept. "She has gone to the tower," he announced grimly. "We must find her before nightfall," two ravens urged. Blackwood, who had been observing the ceremony, stepped forward. "I'll help. I know those hills better than most." As they gathered supplies, two ravens pulled Running Wolf aside. "The eagle feather, it may protect her. It contains your spirit, your power. Will it be enough?" Running Wolf asked, his voice breaking. The medicine man's face remained grave. "Against what dwells in that tower? I pray to the ancestors it will be." The search party departed with urgency, following Morning Feather's small footprints in the dry earth. Running Wolf led them, his aged face set with determination and fear. At Whisper Hill, Morning Feather stood poised at the threshold of the tower, the eagle feather clutched in one hand, the other reaching toward the darkness within. The door waited, open and inviting, as it had for countless others across the centuries. She took a deep breath and stepped inside, the door sealed behind Morning Feather with a sound like a final breath, plunging her into darkness. She clutched her grandfather's eagle feather tighter, drawing comfort from its familiar texture. In response, it began to emit a soft blue-white glow, just enough to illuminate a few feet around her. Her first impression was of impossible vastness. The interior space seemed larger than the tower's exterior dimensions could possibly contain. Walls of the same seamless stone as the outside rose into shadows the feather's light couldn't penetrate. The air felt heavy, ancient and unnaturally cold, despite the summer heat outside. Before her stretched a spiral staircase, its stone steps worn smooth by feet that had ascended over countless years. No handrail offered security on the outer edge, where steps simply ended in a sheer drop into darkness. "Hello," Morning Feather called, her voice swallowed by the oppressive silence. A whisper answered, so quiet she might have imagined it. Her name, spoken like a sigh. The black stone in her medicine pouch pulsed with renewed warmth. Morning Feather placed her foot on the first step. The stone grew hotter. Another step, more heat. She understood its message. Continue upward. As she climbed, markings on the wall began to appear, symbols etched into the stone that resembled those on the door, but more complex, more numerous. When the light from the eagle feather touched them, they glowed with the same blue-white luminescence, then faded as she passed. The temperature dropped with each step, until her breath clouded before her face. 20 steps, 50, 100. She lost count as the spiral continued ever upward. Then she noticed the shadows. At first she thought them tricks of the uncertain light, dark patches that seemed to move when viewed indirectly. But as she climbed higher, their movements became more deliberate. They slid along the walls, not cast by any object, but moving independently, following her ascent. One detached itself from the wall, flowing across the steps ahead of her like ink in water. Morning Feather froze, heart pounding. The shadow paused, seeming to consider her, then continued up the stairs, disappearing around the curve. Outside the tower, Running Wolf led the search party across increasingly barren terrain. Their progress slowed as they approached Whisper Hill, an inexplicable weariness settling into their limbs. Blackwood pointed to the strange tracks Morning Feather had discovered earlier. "Whatever made these is larger than a bear," he observed grimly. Two ravens knelt to examine the impressions. "These are not from any living creature. They are manifestations." They reached the base of the tower as afternoon shadows lengthened. Running Wolf approached the massive door, placing his palm against its ancient wood. "It won't open for you," two ravens warned. "The tower chooses who may enter." Running Wolf struck the door with his fist. "Morning Feather," he called, his voice breaking with desperation. No answer came. Blackwood circled the tower's base, examining its construction with growing bewilderment. "This craftsmanship isn't possible," he muttered. "Even with modern tools," two ravens nodded. "Because it was not built, it appears. There must be another way in," Running Wolf insisted. "Perhaps," two ravens gestured upward. The Spanish records spoke of windows higher up. Inside, Morning Feather continued her ascent, the shadows growing bolder around her. The eagle feather's glow strengthened in response, keeping them at bay, but not driving them away completely. The staircase finally opened onto a landing with 3 identical archways leading off in different directions. Above each arch, symbols pulsed with colored light, red, blue, green. The black stone in her pouch grew painfully hot, then suddenly cold, offering no guidance. Morning Feather held the eagle feather toward each archway in turn. It trembled slightly at the middle path, the blue light. She took a tentative step in that direction. A shadow rushed past her, swift as a hunting hawk, and disappeared into the red-lit archway. Another flowed into the green. Watching them, Morning Feather understood they were attempting to confuse her. "To lead her astray, grandfather," she whispered. "Guide me." The eagle feather pulsed once, strongly confirming her initial instinct. The blue path. Taking a deep breath of the frigid air, Morning Feather stepped through the middle archway. Outside, as twilight approached, Running Wolf found a handhold in the tower's seemingly seamless exterior, a tiny imperfection that offered purchase for climbing. Against the protests of the others, he began to ascend, driven by desperate determination to reach his granddaughter. "There are windows above," he called down to them. "I will find a way in." Blackwood prepared to follow, but 2 ravens held him back. "The sun sets soon," the medicine man warned, eyes on the darkening sky. "We must prepare protection for the night." As if in response to his words, an unnatural shadow began spreading across the land. Though no clouds blocked the setting sun, the archway led Morning Feather into a circular chamber whose walls were entirely covered with symbols that pulsed with soft blue light. Unlike the markings she'd seen earlier, these responded to her presence, brightening as she approached, dimming as she moved away. The eagle feather in her hand vibrated gently, as if recognizing something in the glowing patterns. Morning Feather approached the nearest wall, drawn by symbols that resembled Apache pictographs, yet were somehow older, more primal. As her fingertips hovered near the surface, the symbols rearranged themselves, flowing like water into new configurations. The black stone in her medicine pouch grew warm again, not painfully so, but with a steady heat that matched the rhythm of her heartbeat. "You can understand me," she whispered to the walls. In response, the symbols pulsed brightly, then formed a distinct pattern, a small figure that unmistakably represented a girl. Next to it appeared the shape of the tower, then a spiral that matched the stone stairs she had climbed. "You're showing me my path," Morning Feather realized. "But why am I here? What do you want from me?" The symbols shifted again, this time forming a shape that made her breath catch, a perfect representation of the black stone in her pouch. Then the image expanded, showing similar stones placed in a circular pattern around a central figure that was neither human nor animal, but a swirling darkness with limbs that reached outward like grasping hands. The eagle feather suddenly grew hot in her grip. Morning Feather looked down to see it glowing intensely, its light driving back the shadows that had begun to gather at the edges of the chamber. The wall symbols reacted, scattering like frightened birds, then reforming into a pattern she recognized, the same spiral symbol that had marked Whisper Hill on 2 Ravens' ancient map. Small alcoves previously hidden in the curved walls became visible as the shadows retreated. Each contained objects from different eras: clay pottery with unfamiliar designs, metal armor pieces that might have belonged to Spanish conquistadors, beaded garments from tribes Morning Feather didn't recognize, and stranger items with no obvious purpose. As she moved deeper into the chamber, examining these artifacts of past visitors, the symbols on the wall continued their silent communication, showing her images of people approaching the tower across different landscapes. In different clothing, visitors spanning centuries, perhaps millennia. Then came a whisper, not from the symbols, but seeming to emanate from the stone walls themselves. Her name, spoken in a voice that was neither male nor female, old nor young, but timeless and distant: Morning Feather. Outside, Running Wolf had managed to climb halfway up the tower's exterior, finding almost invisible handholds in the seemingly smooth surface. The unnatural twilight made his progress more difficult, the stone growing slick beneath his fingers, as if the tower itself resisted his efforts. Below, two ravens had arranged the search party in a protective circle around the tower's base. He moved among them, painting symbols on their foreheads with red ochre, murmuring prayers to the ancestors for protection. What good will that do? Blackwood asked, though he submitted to the ritual marking. The long night approaches, two ravens replied gravely. These signs may prevent what dwells in the tower from entering your dreams. Blackwood glanced up at Running Wolf's precarious position on the tower wall. And him? His blood connection to Morning Feather gives him strength the rest of us lack, two ravens explained. The tower may resist, but it cannot deny the bond between them. Running Wolf reached what appeared to be a window, a narrow opening barely wide enough to admit a man. But as he peered inside, he saw only solid stone, as though the opening were merely decorative, never intended to provide entry. He pounded his fist against it in frustration. Inside, Morning Feather heard the distant thudding. The wall symbols flashed urgently, reforming into the image of an old man climbing the tower's exterior. Grandfather, she gasped. The symbols confirmed her understanding, then showed the man falling, plummeting to the ground below. A warning! No! Morning Feather cried. Let him in, please! The symbols swirled in apparent confusion, then slowly formed a new pattern, a doorway opening, but not where Running Wolf currently struggled. Higher, at the tower's summit, the whispering voice returned, louder now. He cannot enter, not yet. First you must ascend. Morning Feather looked around the chamber, seeking another stairway. The symbols directed her attention to a section of wall that appeared solid, but began to shimmer as she watched. The glowing markings parted like a curtain, revealing a continuation of the spiral staircase. I'll find you, Grandfather, she promised, gripping the eagle feather tightly as she approached the newly revealed passage. Just hold on. The stairs beyond were steeper, narrower than before. As Morning Feather began to climb, the wall sealed behind her, the symbols giving one final pulse of blue light before fading into darkness. The stairway wound tighter as Morning Feather climbed, the steps narrowing until her small feet barely fit upon them. The walls pressed closer, the cold intensifying until her fingers grew numb despite the warmth of the eagle feather. After what seemed like hours of climbing, the stairs abruptly ended at a perfectly circular chamber. 3 identical doorways stood before her, arranged in a triangle pattern. Unlike the archways below, these were solid doors of some dark, reflective material that reminded Morning Feather of obsidian. Each bore the same intricate symbol at its center, a spiral within a circle, within another spiral, yet each emanated a distinctly different sensation. The left doorway radiated an almost painful heat that made the air shimmer. The right doorway exuded bitter cold that formed frost patterns on the floor before it. The central doorway emitted nothing perceptible to her senses, no temperature, no sound, no light, a perfect neutrality that was somehow more unnerving than the extremes of the others. The black stone in her pouch had gone silent, offering no guidance. Morning Feather closed her eyes, clutching her grandfather's eagle feather to her chest, listening to her own heartbeat. A memory surfaced, Running Wolf teaching her to hunt, to trust her instincts over her eyes. The eyes can be fooled, he had told her. The heart knows truth. She approached each doorway in turn, extending her hand without touching the surfaces. From the left came impressions of the past, whispers of ancient voices, glimpses of people long dead. From the right, visions of what might be, shadowy futures, possibilities yet unformed. From the center came only the steady pulse of now, the present moment, neither memory nor possibility. Morning Feather stepped toward the center door. It swung inward silently at her approach, revealing a chamber that seemed formed entirely of reflective surfaces. Walls, floor, ceiling, all shimmering like still water under moonlight. Outside the tower, Running Wolf continued his determined climb, though his aged muscles trembled with exhaustion. He had abandoned the sealed window, working his way slowly upward, seeking another opening. The unnatural darkness had deepened around the tower, the last rays of sunlight unable to penetrate what was becoming a dome of shadow. Two Ravens' protective circle was complete. The tribal members sat cross-legged, facing outward, each with the protective symbol on their forehead. Blackwood alone remained standing, a Winchester rifle cradled in his arms as he scanned the gathering gloom. "Something's coming," he muttered, eyes fixed on shifting movements in the darkness beyond their circle. Two Ravens nodded grimly. "The guardians of the threshold. They cannot enter our circle unless we allow them. What exactly are they?" Blackwood asked. "Echoes," the medicine man replied. "Fragments of those who entered the tower and never truly left." Inside the mirror chamber, Morning Feather moved cautiously, disoriented by the endless reflections surrounding her. Her own image bounced back at her from every surface, but subtly wrong, sometimes older, sometimes younger, sometimes with features that weren't quite her own. In one reflection, she appeared as a young woman, strong and confident. In another, an old crone with eyes full of wisdom. In yet another, a warrior with painted face and weapon in hand. Each step brought new variations, as if the chamber were showing her not just who she was, but all she might become. Then she noticed something else. In certain reflections, a shadow stood behind her, formless at first, then gradually taking shape with each passing moment. She whirled around, but nothing was there. Only in the reflections did the presence manifest, growing more distinct with every heartbeat. The black stone pulsed again, its heat building rhythmically. The eagle feather responded, its glow strengthening until the entire chamber blazed with blue-white light. The shadow figure in the reflections recoiled, its form destabilizing before regathering itself with apparent effort. Morning Feather found herself at the center of the chamber, surrounded by countless versions of herself, each with the shadow figure growing more substantial behind them. A whisper filled the room, coming from everywhere and nowhere. "See your many paths," the voice said. "All led to me." Outside, Running Wolf had reached a small ledge near the tower's summit. His searching fingers found an indentation in the stone. Not a window, but a narrow gap where the otherwise perfect masonry showed a flaw. Barely wide enough to see through, it nevertheless offered a view into the tower's interior. What he saw froze his blood. His granddaughter stood in a chamber of mirrors, but she was not alone. Something gathered around her, something ancient and patient and hungry. He pounded on the stone wall, crying her name, but the sound didn't penetrate the tower's thick walls. Below, the darkness had solidified into distinct forms, vaguely human shapes moving just beyond the protective circle, testing its boundaries. Two ravens began a low chant, strengthening their defenses as the first long night fell completely around them. Morning Feather's heart pounded as she stared at the reflection showing the shadow figure standing directly behind her. She spun around again. Nothing. But in every mirrored surface, the entity grew more distinct, more substantial. Features began to form in what had been a featureless void, suggestions of eyes deep and ancient, studying her with cold intelligence. "What are you?" she whispered, her voice echoing strangely in the chamber. The mirrors rippled like disturbed water. The reflections shifted, no longer showing variations of Morning Feather, but scenes from a distant past. She saw Apache warriors on horseback, engaged in battle with enemies she didn't recognize. The scene shifted again, Spanish conquistadors approaching the tower, their faces twisted with greed and fear. Further back, people wearing clothing made from materials she'd never seen, performing rituals around the base of the tower. In each scene, the shadow figure lurked at the edges, observing, influencing, but never fully manifest. "I am patience," the voice whispered. "I am memory. I have waited for one like you, one of the bloodline." Morning Feather recognized faces in some reflections, ancestors whose features resembled her grandfather's. Her mother's, one young man, looked so similar to Running Wolf that she gasped aloud. "You knew my ancestors," she realized. The mirrors rippled again. They knew me. As you will know me, the shadow figure consolidated, appearing more consistently across all reflections now. Morning Feather felt a presence directly behind her, breath cold on her neck, though she saw nothing when she turned. The black stone in her pouch burned fiercely, while the eagle feather's light flickered as if struggling against a strong wind. Fear finally overwhelmed her fascination. Morning Feather backed toward the doorway through which she'd entered, but it had vanished, replaced by more mirrors. She was trapped in a chamber that seemed to expand and contract like a breathing thing, reflections multiplying infinitely around her. Outside, Running Wolf pressed his face to the narrow gap in the stone, desperate for another glimpse of his granddaughter. The tower had begun to pulse with faint blue light, visible only in his peripheral vision, fading when looked at directly. "I see her," he called down to the others. "She's in danger!" Two ravens chanting faltered momentarily. "Can you reach her?" Running Wolf clawed at the small opening, his fingers bleeding from the effort, but the stone remained implacable. "There must be a way in!" Below, the darkness had thickened into a physical barrier around the protective circle. Shadowy figures prowled its perimeter, some appearing as twisted versions of animals, others wearing the aspects of humans from various eras. Blackwood aimed his rifle at a particularly bold shape that tested the circle's boundary, but two ravens placed a restraining hand on the barrel. "Physical weapons cannot harm them," the medicine man warned. "Save your ammunition." Inside the mirror chamber, Morning Feather backed against what felt like a solid wall, though the reflective surface showed only more endless space. The eagle feather pulsed erratically, its light dimming as the shadow figure grew more substantial in the reflections. Then she noticed something peculiar. When viewed through tears of fear that had formed in her eyes, the mirrors revealed different images, not reflections or historical scenes, but diagrams, schematics, instructions. Blinking to clear her vision, they vanished, but by deliberately allowing her eyes to water, she could make them reappear. The black stone vibrated against her hip, its rhythm changing from threatening to insistent. It was trying to communicate something new. Morning Feather wiped her eyes, focusing on the nearest mirror surface. The shadow figure loomed larger there, almost fully formed now. "I see you," she said, straightening her small shoulders. "But I don't fear you," a lie but spoken with conviction. The shadow figure rippled, its form destabilizing momentarily. The eagle feather flared brighter in response. Morning Feather understood. The entity fed on fear grew stronger from it. Courage weakened it. Drawing a deep breath, she raised the eagle feather high. "I am Morning Feather, granddaughter of Running Wolf. My ancestors faced you before, and I face you now." The mirrors trembled. Cracks appeared in several surfaces, light spilling through from some unseen source behind them. The shadow figure retreated in the reflections, shrinking from the expanding fractures. Outside, Running Wolf heard his granddaughter's voice, faint but clear, carrying through the stone as if it had suddenly become permeable to sound. "She's fighting it," he told the others, hope strengthening his weary body. The unnatural night surrounding them pulsed in rhythm with the tower's blue glow. The shadowy guardians grew more agitated, their movements more erratic as they circled the protected Apache. Two ravens looked up at the sky. Where stars should have been visible, a strange darkness spread, consuming the heavens section by section. "The long night begins," he intoned gravely. "We must not falter." The cracks in the mirrors widened, spilling silver-blue light into the chamber. Morning Feather stood her ground, the eagle feather held high, its glow strengthened by her defiance. The shadow figure retreated further in the reflections, but did not disappear entirely. Then a voice spoke directly into her mind, no longer whispering from the mirrors, but clear and intimate, as if lips pressed against her ear. "You are brave, daughter of many mothers," it said, the tone almost admiring. "Braver than most who have stood where you stand. Who are you?" Morning Feather demanded, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "I've been called many names across many ages," the voice replied. "Your people name me Nightwalker. Others called me Dream Eater, Shadow Weaver. He who waits between stars. The mirrors shifted again, showing Morning Feather images of her daily life, playing with Laughing Brook, listening to her grandfather's stories, helping her mother prepare meals. Intimate details no stranger could know. "I have watched you since your birth," the voice continued. "I have waited for you to grow strong enough to hear me." "Why me?" A soft laugh echoed through the chamber. "Because you are of the bloodline, the line unbroken since the builders. Look." The mirrors rippled, showing a woman whose features resembled Morning Feather's mother, but dressed in clothing from another era. The image shifted to another woman, older with similar features, then another and another, tracing backward through generations. "Your family has always been connected to this place," the voice explained. "To me, your grandfather knew it. Why do you think he fled when the tower called him?" "He feared what I might show him." The black stone pulsed against Morning Feather's hip, warmer now, but not burning, almost encouraging. She realized with a start that the stone was how the entity had communicated with her, had drawn her to the tower. "What do you want from me?" "To show you what could be," the voice answered. "To offer knowledge no mortal possesses. To grant powers beyond imagining." The mirrors displayed new images. Morning Feather grown to womanhood, respected and feared, commanding powers that bent nature to her will. Her tribe prospering while others withered, enemies falling before her without a weapon raised. "All this could be yours," the voice promised. "I have waited centuries for one strong enough to accept my gifts." Outside, Running Wolf had wedged his knife into the small opening in the tower wall, working desperately to enlarge it. The stone resisted, harder than any natural material, but small fragments finally began to break away. "I'm coming." "Morning Feather," he muttered, ignoring his bleeding fingers. Below, two ravens continued his protective chant, but his voice had grown hoarse, his elderly body taxed by the sustained effort. The shadowy guardians sensed his weakening and pressed closer to the circle's edge. Blackwood noticed the medicine man's fatigue. "What can I do to help?" "Join your voice with mine," two ravens instructed. "The words need not be the same. Your intention is what matters." Blackwood began to sing a hymn his mother had taught him, his clear tenor voice rising to support two ravens' raspy chant. The other Apache joined in with their own songs, creating a harmony that strengthened the protective barrier. Inside the mirror chamber, Morning Feather found herself entranced by the entity's visions of power and glory. Yet something felt wrong. The woman in those reflections bore her face, but not her spirit. "If you're so powerful," she asked carefully, "why do you need me?" The voice paused, the mirrors flickering momentarily. "I am contained. The tower is both my domain and my prison. Those who built it feared what they could not control. But you could release me and in return share in my power." Morning Feather's fingers tightened around the eagle feather. "My grandfather rejected you. Why?" "He was weak," the voice hissed, its tone shifting from seductive to contemptuous. "Afraid of true power. But you are stronger. I've felt it since you were born." The mirrors displayed Running Wolf as a young man, standing in this same chamber, terror on his face as he fled. The image shifted to show his subsequent life. Respected but ordinary, bound by tradition and the limits of mortality. "He chose mediocrity," the voice continued. "You need not make the same mistake." The black stone grew hotter, insistent. Morning Feather realized it was more than a communication tool. It was a key of some kind. "What would releasing you mean?" she asked. "Freedom," the voice answered simply. "For both of us." Running Wolf finally created an opening large enough to see his granddaughter clearly. She stood surrounded by shifting mirrors, apparently speaking to empty air. But he saw what she could not, a darkness gathering above her, taking form, reaching down with appendages that were neither arms nor tentacles, but something more primitive, more fundamental. "Morning Feather!" he shouted through the opening. "It lies. Whatever it promises is a lie." Inside, Morning Feather heard her grandfather's voice, faint but unmistakable. She turned toward the sound, glimpsing his face through a small hole in the tower wall. The mirrors around her shattered simultaneously. plunging the chamber into darkness as the entity's voice rose to a roar of frustration. Darkness enveloped Morning Feather as the mirrors shattered, their fragments dissolving into shadow rather than falling to the floor. The entity's presence intensified, no longer confined to reflections, but surrounding her in the physical space. A pressure against her skin like cold water. "Your grandfather seeks to deny you your birthright," the voice hissed, now coming from everywhere at once. "He fears what you might become." Morning Feather gripped the eagle feather tighter, its glow providing the only light in the oppressive darkness. "Show yourself truly," she demanded, not in reflections or whispers. A low laugh resonated through the chamber. "Are you certain? You have seen my true form and maintained their sanity." Despite her fear, Morning Feather stood her ground. "I want the truth." The darkness before her condensed, solidified. A figure took shape, tall and vaguely humanoid, but wrong in ways that made her eyes hurt. Its proportions shifted constantly, limbs elongating, then contracting, features forming and dissolving. Only the eyes remained constant, ancient, cold, hungry. "Is this truth enough for you, child of the builders?" it asked, its actual voice as wrong as its form, layered with multiple tones, speaking slightly out of sync. Morning Feather swallowed hard, but did not look away. The black stone in her pouch pulsed urgently, almost painfully hot against her hip. "Grandfather!" She called toward the small opening where she had glimpsed Running Wolf's face. "I see it now." Outside, Running Wolf redoubled his efforts to widen the opening, desperation lending strength to his aging arms. "Fight it, Morning Feather! It cannot harm one of your blood, not directly." Inside, the entity's form rippled with what might have been amusement. "He speaks truly. I cannot harm you directly. That is part of the binding that imprisons me. But there are many forms of harm, child, and many paths to freedom." It extended what might have been a hand, though the fingers were too numerous and jointed in impossible ways. "Come, I have more to show you." Morning Feather hesitated, then shook her head. No more visions. No more lies. The entity's form grew larger, towering over her. "Then perhaps you would prefer truth. The complete truth." A section of wall slid open, revealing a hidden chamber beyond. Morning Feather glimpsed ancient artifacts within, and something else, bones. Human bones, arranged in careful patterns on the floor. Those who were not of the bloodline, the entity explained casually. Those who served their purpose and were no longer needed. Outside, Blackwood had left the protective circle briefly, returning to his saddlebags. He withdrew a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. "My grandfather's journal," he explained to two ravens. "He was part of the Spanish expedition that found the tower 60 years ago. Only he returned." Two ravens accepted the journal reverently. "What does it tell us?" "I've never been able to read much of it. His handwriting deteriorated after his return. But there are drawings." Blackwood opened the journal to pages filled with meticulous sketches of the tower's interior, including diagrams of mechanisms, symbols, and a detailed rendering of a multi-armed entity. "This is what dwells inside," two ravens confirmed, recognizing the entity from ancient tribal stories. "The Nightwalker," Blackwood pointed to a particular drawing, a circular chamber with an altar at its center. He wrote that this room exists at the top of the tower, something about a celestial alignment that strengthens or weakens the entity's prison. Two ravens studied the diagrams intently. "These are instructions," he realized, "for reinforcing the binding." He looked up at the tower where Running Wolf continued his desperate climb. "We must get this information to them." Inside the hidden chamber, Morning Feather cautiously examined the artifacts while keeping her distance from the bone arrangements. Ancient pottery, weapons from different eras, jewelry and tools lined stone shelves carved into the walls. One item caught her attention, a small wooden box with symbols matching those on the tower door. Inside lay a folded piece of parchment covered with Spanish writing. Though she couldn't read the words, the accompanying diagrams were clear enough. They showed the tower, the entity, and a circular arrangement of black stones, like the one in her pouch. The entity hovered near the chamber entrance, its form flickering between solid and shadow. The Spanish were clever, but ultimately useless to me. Not of the bloodline. Not like you. Morning Feather carefully refolded the parchment and slipped it into her dress pocket. The black stone seemed to react to the document, its pulsing growing more erratic. "What does it mean to be of the bloodline?" she asked, stalling for time as she tried to understand the diagram she'd seen. "Your ancestors built this tower," the entity replied. "Not to worship me as some believed, but to contain me. Their blood, your blood, is the key to the binding, and potentially to my release." Running Wolf had finally created an opening large enough to see the entire chamber. He watched in horror as his granddaughter conversed with the manifested entity, seemingly unafraid despite its nightmarish appearance. "Morning Feather!" he called through the gap. "The binding can be strengthened." "There is a way!" The entity's form rippled violently at these words. It turned toward Running Wolf's voice, extending a limb that elongated impossibly across the chamber, darkness solidifying into claws that scraped against the stone wall. "Silence, old man," it snarled. "You had your chance and fled. The girl is mine now." The entity's claw-like appendage scraped against the wall where Running Wolf peered through, sending stone fragments flying. Morning Feather cried out in alarm, but her grandfather had already pulled back from the opening, years of warrior training making his reflexes swift despite his age. "You will not harm him," she shouted, surprised by the authority in her voice. The entity paused, its form rippling as if in surprise. The appendage retracted, darkness flowing back into its central mass. "I forget myself," it said, tone shifting from rage to false congeniality. "Forgive me, child. Your grandfather's interference provokes me." Morning Feather's gaze darted around the hidden chamber, taking in details she had missed initially. Beyond the bone arrangements and artifacts, a section of the rear wall bore inscriptions, hundreds of symbols carved into the stone in multiple languages. Some she recognized as resembling Apache pictographs, others appeared to be Spanish, and many more in scripts she had never seen. Moving closer, she realized it was a record, a chronicle written by previous captives of the tower. Some entries were lengthy narratives, others mere names and dates. The most recent, still sharp-edged as if carved recently, was in Spanish. The entity noticed her interest. "My guests often feel compelled to leave their mark," it explained, with what might have been amusement, a human preoccupation with being remembered. Morning Feather ran her fingers over the carvings, feeling the desperation in each stroke. "These people, they never left the tower, did they?" "Some did," the entity replied, "those who proved useful. And the others?" She gestured toward the bone arrangements, contributed in their own way. The entity's form shifted again, growing larger. "But you need not concern yourself with their fate. You are special. Of the bloodline," Morning Feather's mind raced, connecting fragments of information. The black stone, the Spanish parchment, her grandfather's warnings, the wall of inscriptions. They formed a pattern she was beginning to understand. "You need me to free you," she stated. "Not just any person, specifically me." The entity's form contracted slightly. "Perceptive child. Yes, the binding was created with the blood of your ancestors. It can only be undone by their descendant. But my grandfather lacked courage," the entity interrupted. "Or perhaps vision. He fled rather than embrace his destiny." Outside, Running Wolf had moved away from the damaged section of wall, seeking another access point. The entity's attack had weakened the stone structure, creating hairline cracks that spread outward from the impact point. Below, two ravens studied Blackwood's grandfather's journal with increasing urgency. "The alignment approaches," he announced, pointing to a diagram showing celestial positions. "When the three sisters' stars align directly above the tower, the binding is at its weakest. When will that happen?" Blackwood asked. "Tonight," two ravens replied grimly. "Within hours." The shadowy guardians circling their protective barrier grew more agitated, their forms solidifying as true night deepened around them. From the settlement far to the south, they heard the distant beating of drums, the tribe responding to the unnatural darkness with their own protective rituals. Inside the hidden chamber, Morning Feather examined the wall inscriptions more closely. Among the Spanish text, certain phrases had been carved more deeply, with more care, potentially crucial information. Though she couldn't read the words, recurring symbols alongside them matched those on the parchment in her pocket. One carving caught her eye, a rough diagram similar to the stone arrangements on the parchment, but with additional details. It showed the central chamber at the tower's summit, with the black stones positioned around what appeared to be an altar. But most importantly, it showed a figure placing one stone in the center, completing a pattern. The black stone in her pouch vibrated as if responding to her discovery. Morning Feather understood with sudden clarity. The stone was indeed a key, but not necessarily to release the entity. It could also be used to strengthen the binding. "You've been influencing events," she said, turning to face the entity. "Not just calling me to the tower, but arranging for me to find the stone." The entity's form shifted uneasily. "I merely awakened what was already there. Your connection to this place, to me—" "No," Morning Feather said with growing confidence. "You've been manipulating everything. The strange occurrences in the settlement, the animals' behavior, perhaps even the trader Blackwood coming with his grandfather's knowledge." The entity drew itself up to its full, intimidating height. "Clever child. Yes, I have been arranging circumstances for generations, waiting for the right descendant, the right alignment. For you, Morning Feather." It extended a limb again, this time more gently. "And now you are here, as I knew you would be. It is time to fulfill your destiny." Morning Feather clutched the eagle feather tightly, its warm light a reminder of her grandfather's protection. "And if I refuse?" The entity's form darkened, its eyes burning like cold stars. "Then the binding weakens regardless, but slowly, over centuries rather than tonight. I'm patient. I can wait for another of your line to be more cooperative." It gestured toward the bone arrangements. "Though your grandfather might not survive his current visit to my tower." Morning Feather felt a chill that had nothing to do with the chamber's cold air. The entity couldn't harm her directly, but Running Wolf had no such protection. Morning Feather withdrew the black stone from her medicine pouch, studying it with new understanding. Its surface gleamed in the dim light, reflecting nothing yet containing impossible depths. This small object, which had called to her across the valley, was far more than a simple communication tool. It was an artifact of power, created for a specific purpose. "You cannot harm me directly," she said to the entity, "because of my bloodline. And you need me to use this stone willingly." The entity's form shifted, contracting slightly. "Perceptive child." The builders were thorough in their precautions. "The binding requires voluntary action to be undone." "Tell me about the builders," Morning Feather demanded, buying time as she processed what she had learned. The entity's voice took on a contemplative tone. "They were your ancestors, though they called themselves by another name, long forgotten. They possess knowledge that your people have lost, of the stars, of the Earth's deep places, of the spaces between worlds where beings like me dwell." Its form expanded, filling the chamber with shifting darkness. "They summoned me, thinking to harness my power. When they realized they could not control me, they built this tower as a prison." Morning Feather turned the stone in her palm. "And these stones?" "Keystones of the binding. 7 were created, each attuned to the bloodline. Over centuries I have collected them. Yours is the last." A cold realization washed over Morning Feather. "You've been gathering them all this time, waiting for the right descendant." "The alignment approaches," the entity confirmed. "When the 3 sisters' stars stand directly above this tower, the veil between worlds thins. With all 7 stones and the willing participation of the bloodline, the binding can be broken or strengthened," Morning Feather countered. Remembering the diagrams on the Spanish parchment, the entity's form rippled violently. "Yes," it admitted reluctantly. "The same alignment, the same stones, but placed in a different pattern." The Spanish expedition leader discovered this truth before he died. Outside, Running Wolf had found another weakness in the tower's structure, a section where the stones didn't quite meet, creating a narrow fissure. He worked his knife into the gap, leveraging his weight against the ancient material. Below, 2 ravens and blackwood poured over the journal's diagrams by firelight. The protective circle still held, though several of the Apache warriors had collapsed from exhaustion. The constant pressure of the shadow guardians draining their strength. Here, Blackwood pointed to a particular page. My grandfather drew the summit chamber. 7 alcoves arranged in a circle with a central altar. 2 ravens nodded gravely. The binding configuration. If the stones are placed in these alcoves during the alignment, the entity remains imprisoned for another cycle. And if not, the medicine man's face darkened. The long night becomes permanent. Inside the tower, Morning Feather held the black stone toward the entity. If I help you break the binding, what happens to my people? To the world outside? The entity's form solidified further, becoming almost corporeal. I would be free to expand my domain beyond this tower, to bring the knowledge of the spaces between worlds to your people. As their ruler, Morning Feather stated, not a question, as their god, the entity corrected. Is that not preferable to their current existence? Small lives filled with hardship, illness, conflict with the white settlers. I could give them power beyond imagining. At what cost? The entity's form rippled in what might have been a shrug. Change always requires sacrifice. But your bloodline would be honored above all others. You would stand at my side, Morning Feather, neither child nor woman, but something greater. It extended a limb toward her, not threatening now, but almost supplicating. Your grandfather faced this same choice as a young man. He chose fear over power. He ran. A new voice spoke from behind Morning Feather. I chose wisdom over temptation. She turned to see Running Wolf squeezing through a newly created opening in the wall, his clothing torn, his hands bloody from his climb and struggle with the stone. Grandfather! She cried, rushing to him, the entity's form convulsed with rage. You are not welcome here, old man. Running Wolf stood straight despite his exhaustion, one hand on his granddaughter's shoulder, the other reaching for the black stone she held. I made a mistake when I fled this tower as a young man, he admitted. I should have completed the binding ritual, not left it for another generation. He looked down at Morning Feather, his weathered face solemn. The stone found me just as it found you, but I was afraid. I buried it, hoping it would remain hidden. When it surfaced again and called to you, I knew the cycle was beginning anew. The entity's form expanded, darkness filling the chamber like smoke. The difference is that I have all 7 stones now, it hissed. And the alignment comes tonight. Morning Feather looked from her grandfather to the entity, then down at the stone in her palm. Its surface had begun to glow with a pale inner light, pulsing in rhythm with the faint blue illumination that now emanated from the tower walls. We need to reach the summit, Running Wolf whispered urgently. Before the alignment, the entity's laughter echoed through the chamber, a sound like breaking glass and rushing wind. By all means, it said, its form parting to reveal a doorway leading to another spiral staircase. The summit awaits us all. The spiral staircase beyond the doorway wound tighter than before. The steps narrow and slick, with a crystalline substance that gleamed in the light from Morning Feather's eagle feather. Running Wolf kept one hand on his granddaughter's shoulder as they climbed. His breathing labored but determined. Behind them, the entity flowed like living smoke, sometimes rushing ahead only to double back, its form growing more substantial with each passing minute. The tower walls pulsed with blue light in a rhythm that matched the gleam of the black stone in Morning Feather's hand. The alignment approaches. The entity's voice resonated around them. Can you feel it, child of the bloodline? The thinning of the veil. Morning Feather could indeed feel something changing, a pressure in her ears, a tingling along her skin. The air itself seemed charged with potential, like the moment before lightning strikes. Don't listen to it, Running Wolf cautioned. Focus on the climb. They ascended in tense silence until the staircase finally opened onto a vast circular chamber at the tower's summit. Morning Feather gasped at the sight. The ceiling was open to the night sky, where stars shone with unnatural brilliance. 7 alcoves were spaced evenly around the perimeter, each containing a pedestal. At the center stood a raised altar of black stone, its surface carved with the same symbols found throughout the tower. Most striking, however, was what hovered above the altar, a dark mass suspended in mid-air, pulsing and writhing like a living thing. It was as if a piece of the night sky had been torn free and compressed into a dense ball of absolute darkness. Occasional flashes of negative light illuminated its contours, revealing a shape that defied comprehension, angles that couldn't exist, dimensions that folded in on themselves. "My true form," the entity said, its voice now coming from both the humanoid shadow that had followed them and the suspended darkness above the altar, "or a portion of it that exists in your reality." Running Wolf's grip on Morning Feather's shoulder tightened. "The binding tethers it to that manifestation," he explained quickly. "It cannot fully enter our world while the binding holds." The entity's humanoid form grew more defined, limbs solidifying, features emerging from the shadowy mass, a face that was almost human, but wrong in subtle, disturbing ways. Eyes like black holes studied them with ancient intelligence. "Clever man," it acknowledged. "The builders created the binding to anchor me between worlds, neither banishing me completely nor allowing me full entry." Its attention shifted to Morning Feather. "But tonight, with your help, that changes." The entity gestured, and 6 pedestals around the room began to glow. On each rested a black stone, identical to the one Morning Feather carried, collected over centuries, it explained, from those of your bloodline who came before. Some given willingly, others acquired through persuasion. Running Wolf moved toward one of the pedestals, but the entity's form elongated, blocking his path. "Not yet, old man. The ritual requires the correct moment and the willing participation of the bloodline." The suspended darkness above the altar pulsed more rapidly, tendrils of void extending downward. As Morning Feather watched, the tendrils began to take shape, forming a massive figure that dwarfed the humanoid shadow. Limbs like gnarled branches, a torso that seemed to contain swirling galaxies, a head crowned with twisted protrusions that resembled antlers made of condensed darkness. "Behold me," the entity's voice boomed, now emanating primarily from the larger manifestation, "as close to my true form as your mind can comprehend without breaking." Morning Feather stared, transfixed by the entity's awful majesty. It was ancient beyond imagining, powerful beyond measure, alien beyond comprehension. Yet there was an undeniable intelligence in its regard, a will that had persisted through eons of imprisonment. "Why show us this?" Running Wolf demanded, placing himself between the entity and his granddaughter. "So that you understand the futility of resistance," it replied, "and the magnitude of what I offer." The larger manifestation extended a limb toward Morning Feather, the movement sending ripples through reality itself. "Join me willingly. Place the final stone on the central altar. Complete the breaking pattern. In return, your people will be spared when I remake this world." Running Wolf turned to Morning Feather, his aged face urgent in the pulsing blue light. "It offers only lies," he whispered. "If freed, it will consume everything, not just our tribe, but all that exists in our world." The entity's massive form rippled with what might have been laughter. "Listen to your elder, child. Always so afraid, so limited in vision. But ask yourself, if I meant to destroy your kind, why would I need your willing participation? Why not simply wait for the binding to erode naturally?" It leaned closer, the void where its face should be somehow conveying an expression of earnest persuasion. "I need allies in this world, partners. The bloodline has always been special, sensitive to the spaces between worlds. Together, we could bridge the gap between realities, bring knowledge beyond imagining." Morning Feather looked between her grandfather and the entity, the black stone warm in her palm. Outside the tower, the night sky had deepened to an impossible blackness, stars shining with desperate brilliance against the encroaching void. The three sister stars were almost aligned directly above the open ceiling. At the base of the tower, Two Ravens clutched his chest, feeling the change in the air as the alignment drew near. The protective circle had weakened as more of the Apache warriors succumbed to exhaustion, their bodies slumping forward while still maintaining the circular formation. Only Blackwood and three others remained fully conscious, their voices hoarse from hours of continuous chanting. "We need more strength," Two Ravens murmured, his aged face drawn with strain. Blackwood looked up at the tower's summit, visible as a faint blue glow against the unnatural night sky. "What about your most sacred relics? Would they help?" Two Ravens' eyes widened. The bone flute. It has not been played in 3 generations. He reached into his medicine bag and withdrew an object wrapped in soft deer hide. Carefully unwinding the protective covering, he revealed a flute crafted from a human femur, yellowed with age and inscribed with symbols similar to those on the tower walls. "This belonged to our greatest medicine man," Two Ravens explained. "It is said to drive away darkness with its song." "Can you play it?" Blackwood asked. Two Ravens shook his head. The knowledge was lost. The proper notes, the sacred patterns, all forgotten. Blackwood gently took the flute, examining its structure. "My mother was Cherokee," he said quietly. "She taught me their flute music before she died, perhaps." Two Ravens nodded. "Try. We have little to lose now." Meanwhile, in the settlement far to the south, strange phenomena had begun. Children rose from their sleeping mats, eyes open but unseeing, and began walking northward toward Whisper Hill. Laughing, Brooke was among them, her normally expressive face blank as she moved with dreamlike purpose. Silent Dove. Morning Feather's mother tried to restrain the children, but found they possessed unnatural strength. "The tower calls them," she realized with horror. The elders gathered quickly, organizing a group to follow the children, while others maintained protective rituals in the settlement. Grey Hawk led the pursuit, his aged legs struggling to keep pace with the eerily determined children. Inside the summit chamber, Morning Feather felt the black stone grow warmer as the 3 sister stars moved closer to alignment. The entity's massive form expanded further, tendrils of void extending toward the 7 alcoves. "The moment approaches," it intoned, its voice reverberating through the chamber. "Soon the veil will be at its thinnest, and your choice must be made." Running Wolf placed his hand over Morning Feather's, covering the stone. "There is another way," he said urgently. "The Spanish parchment. It shows the binding configuration." The entity's smaller manifestation moved with blinding speed, striking Running Wolf and sending him sprawling across the chamber floor. "Enough interference, old man," Morning Feather cried out, rushing to her grandfather's side. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes remained clear and focused. "It cannot harm you directly," he reminded her. "But I have no such protection." The entity's massive form rippled with impatience. "The bloodline's protection extends only to direct harm, child. I can cause plenty of suffering without killing." To demonstrate, tendrils of darkness wrapped around Running Wolf's leg, applying pressure that made him grimace in pain. "Your grandfather's bones are fragile with age. They would snap so easily." "Stop!" Morning Feather commanded, surprised again by the authority in her voice. The entity released Running Wolf but hovered menacingly above him. "Choose, Morning Feather. Freedom or binding, power or subservience, the future or the past." A distant sound reached them, faint but clear, floating up from below the tower. The haunting notes of a flute, played with halting uncertainty at first, then with growing confidence. The entity's form recoiled, tendrils of void contracting as if the music caused physical pain. "No!" it roared. Running Wolf's eyes widened in recognition. "The bone flute," he whispered. Two Ravens found a way. Outside, Blackwood played with increasing skill, finding patterns that resonated with the tower's energies. With each note, the shadowy guardians, circling their protective barrier, grew more agitated, their forms becoming unstable. Two ravens added his voice to the music, chanting words that complemented the melody. The remaining conscious Apache warriors joined in, their strength seemingly renewed by the ancient sound. The settlement children had reached the base of Whisper Hill, forming a circle around the tower with Laughing Brook at its center. Their eyes remained vacant, but their voices rose in an unearthly chorus that somehow harmonized with Blackwood's flute. Grey Hawk and the pursuing elders watched in astonishment as the children began a slow, synchronized dance around the tower's base. It was no Apache ritual they recognized, but something older, as if the movements were encoded in their blood memory. Inside the summit chamber, Morning Feather felt the black stone pulse in rhythm with the distant music. She looked up at the night sky through the open ceiling. The three sisters' stars were seconds away from perfect alignment. "I've made my choice," she announced, her young voice steady despite her racing heart. The entity's massive form leaned closer, anticipation evident in its shifting void. "And your decision, child of the bloodline?" Morning Feather stepped toward the central altar, the black stone held before her like an offering. "I choose." Morning Feather stood before the central altar, the black stone held in her outstretched palm. Above her, through the open ceiling, the three sisters' stars shimmered with unnatural brilliance, seconds away from perfect alignment. The entity's massive form hovered expectantly, tendrils of void extending toward her like eager fingers. "I choose neither freedom nor binding as you present them," she declared. "There must be another way." The entity recoiled slightly, its form rippling with what might have been confusion. "There is no third option, child. The stones either break the binding or reinforce it." Running Wolf had managed to stand, one hand pressed against his injured side. "Morning Feather, the parchment—" "I remember," she interrupted, her eyes never leaving the entity's towering form. 6 stones in the alcoves, one at the center. But which pattern is which? How do I know which configuration releases and which binds? The entity's smaller manifestation moved closer, its tone becoming persuasive. "Trust your instincts, child of the bloodline. You know the answer within your heart." Below, Blackwood's flute playing grew more confident, the melody finding resonance with the tower's structure. Each note seemed to ripple through the stone walls, causing the blue light to pulse in rhythm. The tranced children's dance became more elaborate, their movements perfectly synchronized despite their vacant expressions. Two ravens recognized the pattern. "The binding dance," he whispered in awe. "Not performed in generations. The children remember through their blood." Inside the summit chamber, Morning Feather felt the music's vibrations through her feet. The black stone in her palm hummed in harmony, its inner light brightening. She looked around the circular room, studying the 7 alcoves and their pedestals. Each pedestal was subtly different, she realized. The symbols carved into their bases varied, similar but not identical. And the ceiling opening was precisely positioned so that when the three sisters' stars aligned, their light would shine directly onto the central altar. "The chamber itself is an instrument," she murmured, understanding dawning. "The celestial alignment, the stones, the specific placement, they create a pattern of energy." Running Wolf nodded. "The Spanish explorer discovered this. The parchment shows—" "Enough delays!" The entity roared, its patience exhausted. Its massive form contracted, then expanded violently, sending a shockwave through the chamber that knocked both Morning Feather and Running Wolf to the floor. The black stone flew from Morning Feather's hand, skittering across the smooth stone floor toward the central altar. The entity's smaller manifestation lunged for it, but the stone stopped just short of its reach, as if repelled by an invisible barrier. "You cannot touch it directly," Morning Feather realized, scrambling to her feet. "Just as you cannot harm me." The builder's precautions worked both ways. The entity's form writhed with frustration. "The alignment comes. Choose now, or watch your grandfather suffer." Tendrils of darkness wrapped around Running Wolf, lifting him from the floor. He made no sound, though pain etched deep lines in his weathered face. Morning Feather retrieved the stone, its surface now pulsing with blue-white light that matched the chamber's walls. The Spanish parchment had fallen from her pocket during the entity's attack, unfolding to reveal its diagrams. She studied it quickly, noting how the stone placements formed a pattern that either focused inward or outward from the central, altered the summit chamber, what Blackwood's grandfather had called the celestial chamber in his journal, was designed to channel energy from the stars through specific configurations. One pattern would direct that energy into strengthening the entity's prison. The other would use it to shatter the binding completely. Outside, the children's circular dance had created a visible effect, a ring of soft blue light that rose from the ground around the tower's base, climbing slowly up its exterior walls. Blackwood played the bone flute with fervor, his fingers finding notes that seemed to come from memory, not his own. Greyhawk watched in astonishment as Laughing Brook stepped into the center of the children's circle. Though her eyes remained vacant, her voice rose in a clear, high song that complemented the flute's melody. The other children joined, creating a chorus that made the air itself vibrate with power. Two ravens understood what was happening. "The children are channeling the ancestral knowledge," he explained to Blackwood between flute passages. "They remember what we have forgotten." In the summit chamber, Morning Feather made her decision. She moved with sudden purpose, placing the black stone on the central altar. The effect was immediate. The stone blazed with brilliant light, casting 7 beams toward the alcoves around the room. "Yes," the entity exulted. "Now complete the pattern." Morning Feather turned to face it, determination hardening her young features. "I will complete a pattern," she confirmed. "But first, release my grandfather." The entity hesitated, then slowly lowered Running Wolf to the floor. "A final courtesy," it said, its voice resonating with anticipation. "Now finish what generations of your bloodline have feared to do." The 3 sisters' stars aligned perfectly above the open ceiling, their combined light forming a brilliant shaft that struck the central altar. Morning Feather felt power surge through the chamber as she moved toward the first alcove, ready to place the stones in their final configuration. The combined light of the 3 sisters' stars struck the central altar like a physical force. Surrounding the black stone Morning Feather had placed there with a column of brilliant radiance. The stone rose slightly, hovering an inch above the altar's surface. Rotating slowly, as if examining the chamber, Morning Feather moved toward the nearest alcove, where one of the 6 remaining stones waited on its pedestal. The entity's massive form loomed above her, tendrils of void extending and contracting with anticipation. Running Wolf watched silently from where he had fallen, his eyes never leaving his granddaughter. "Yes," the entity encouraged, its voice thrumming with excitement. "Place them in the release configuration. Freedom awaits us both." The perfect circle of stone set into the floor. Around the central altar, what Blackwood's grandfather had called the binding circle in his journal began to glow with the same blue-white light as the walls. Ancient symbols etched into its surface became visible, forming concentric rings of text in languages long forgotten. Morning Feather reached for the first stone, then hesitated, looking back at Running Wolf. "Grandfather." "Should I trust your heart?" he replied, his voice weak but steady. "As I failed to trust mine." The entity's smaller manifestation moved impatiently. "The alignment is brief, child. Moments only. Decide." Outside, the ring of blue light had climbed halfway up the tower, fed by the children's synchronized dance and Blackwood's flute playing. Laughing Brook stood at the center of their circle, her song rising and falling in patterns that seemed to direct the light's movement. Her vacant eyes had begun to glow with the same blue-white luminescence. 2 ravens recognized what was happening. "The children are completing the external binding," he explained to Blackwood between breaths. "Their innocence channels the ancestral power." Inside, Morning Feather took the first stone from its pedestal and approached the central altar. The binding circle pulsed in response to her movement, symbols shifting to form new patterns. She placed the stone carefully at a specific point on the circle, following the diagram she had memorized from the Spanish parchment. The entity watched closely, Yes, exactly so. Continue, child of the bloodline. Morning Feather retrieved the second stone, placing it at another point on the circle. Then the third. With each placement, the circle's glow intensified, and the shaft of starlight connecting the central stone to the open ceiling grew broader. The entity's form began to change, the void becoming more defined, more substantial. I feel the binding weakening, it exulted. Continue, Morning Feather. 3 more stones. Running Wolf watched with growing concern. The pattern Morning Feather was creating matched neither the release configuration nor the binding reinforcement shown on the Spanish parchment. She was improvising something new. Morning Feather, he called, his voice urgent. What are you doing? She did not answer. Her attention focused entirely on the precise placement of the stones. The 4th stone joined the others on the binding circle, then the 5th. Only one remained on its distant pedestal. The entity's massive form expanded further, reaching toward the open ceiling where the aligned stars shone. One more stone, it urged. Place it and fulfill your destiny. Morning Feather turned toward the final pedestal, but stopped halfway. Instead, she reached into her medicine pouch and withdrew her grandfather's eagle feather, its glow now rivaling the stones themselves. What is this? The entity demanded, its tone shifting from triumphant to uncertain. Balance, Morning Feather replied simply. She placed the eagle feather at the final position in her created pattern. For a moment nothing happened. Then the feather's glow intensified, spreading to encompass the entire binding circle. The 6 stones and the feather formed a new configuration, neither release nor reinforcement, but transformation. The entity recoiled, its form destabilizing. What have you done? It roared. What the builders intended, Morning Feather answered, her young voice steady. They didn't create the binding to imprison you forever or to release you completely. They created it to transform you. The central stone rose higher above the altar. Spinning faster as the starlight focused through it, created a vortex of energy that connected to each of the 6 stones and the eagle feather. The binding circle began to rotate, its symbols flowing like liquid around the chamber floor. Outside, the ring of blue light reached the tower's summit just as Laughing Brook's song reached its crescendo. The children's dance shifted to a new pattern, their movements perfectly synchronized with the rotation of the binding circle inside. The entity's form convulsed violently, caught in the vortex of energy. No, it howled, its voice distorting. This is not release or binding. This is transformation, Running Wolf finished, understanding dawning on his weathered face. The third option. The vortex intensified, pulling the entity's massive form toward the central altar. Its void-like substance began to separate, darker elements drawn into the spinning central stone, while lighter essences spread outward through the chamber. I will not be unmade. The entity raged, its smaller manifestation dissolving as it spoke. Not unmade, Morning Feather corrected, standing firm at the edge of the binding circle. Reborn. The vortex reached its peak intensity as the 3 sister stars achieved perfect alignment. Light and darkness swirled together around the central stone, neither dominating the other. Balance, not victory. Transformation, not destruction. Morning Feather turned to her grandfather, extending her hand to him across the rotating binding circle. Together, she said, Running Wolf understood. He took her small hand in his weathered one, and together they stepped into the vortex. Adding their bloodline's essence to the transformation, dawn broke over Whisper Hill. Golden light spilling across a landscape transformed. Where the stone tower had stood for countless generations, only a circle of strange stones remained, arranged in the same pattern Morning Feather had created with the black stones and her grandfather's eagle feather. In the center of the circle, a small sapling had emerged from the earth, its trunk silver-gray, its leaves an unusual blue-green that shimmered in the morning light. 2 ravens approached it cautiously, feeling the power that radiated from the young tree. The binding and the bound, he murmured, understanding, had transformed together. Blackwood stood nearby, the bone flute still clutched in his hand. The children, who had performed the mysterious dance, lay sleeping peacefully around the stone circle, their faces serene, no trace remaining of their trance-like state. Laughing Brook was the first to stir, blinking in confusion at her unfamiliar surroundings. "Morning Feather?" she called, sitting up and looking around. "Where is Morning Feather?" From the edge of the stone circle emerged two figures, supporting each other as they walked. Running Wolf appeared decades older than he had been just hours before, his hair now completely white, his face deeply lined. But his eyes shone with a clarity and peace that transcended his apparent aging. Beside him walked Morning Feather, outwardly unchanged, yet fundamentally altered. Something in her eyes, in the way she carried herself, spoke of wisdom beyond her years. She had entered the tower a curious child. She emerged something more. Neither fully child nor adult, but a bridge between worlds. What happened? Blackwood asked, rushing to help support Running Wolf. "Transformation," the old chief replied simply. "The entity is no more. At least, not as it was." Morning Feather gazed at the sapling growing in the center of the stone circle. "Not destroyed," she corrected gently. "Changed. As are we." Two ravens studied them both carefully. "You gave something of yourselves to complete the binding." Running Wolf nodded. "Years of my life. A fair exchange. And you?" "Two ravens," asked Morning Feather. She smiled, a complex expression that seemed too mature for her young face. "Innocence," she answered. "But I gained knowledge in its place." The other children awakened gradually, confused but unharmed by their night's strange journey. Laughing Brook embraced Morning Feather tightly, then pulled back, noticing the change in her friend. "You're different," she said, her voice uncertain. Morning Feather nodded. "I will always be your friend," she promised. "But I am also something else now." Over the following days, the Apache settlement and the neighboring white communities processed the events of the Long Night, as it came to be called. The unnatural darkness had been seen for miles around, and many reported strange dreams or visions. But with the dawn had come a sense of peace that transcended the usual tensions between the cultures. 1 month after the transformation, Morning Feather returned to Whisper Hill alone. The sapling had grown with unnatural speed, already standing taller than a man, its silver-grey trunk thickening, its blue-green leaves rustling with voices only she could hear. From her medicine pouch, she withdrew a new item, a small staff carved from wood of the sacred tree that now grew where the tower had stood. 2 ravens had helped her craft it, showing her how to incorporate symbols from the tower walls into its intricate designs. "I hear you," she said to the tree, placing her hand against its smooth bark. "I understand my role now." The tree's leaves shimmered in response. Though no wind stirred the air, Morning Feather had begun apprenticeship with 2 ravens, learning the medicine ways, but her training went beyond traditional knowledge. The transformation had connected her to something ancient and vast, the purified essence of what had been the entity, now bound in partnership rather than imprisonment. Running Wolf joined her on his daily walk, moving slower now with his accelerated age, but his spirit stronger than ever. "Do you regret your choice?" he asked, watching her commune with the tree. Morning Feather shook her head. "It was the only true choice. Not freedom or binding, but balance." "You succeeded where I failed as a young man," Running Wolf said, pride evident in his voice. "Not failed," Morning Feather corrected. "Your journey was preparation for mine, as mine will be preparation for whoever comes next." They stood together as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across Whisper Hill. In the distance, they could see both the Apache settlement and the white ranches, existing side by side in an uneasy but improving peace. Will it last? Running Wolf wondered aloud. Morning Feather gripped her staff, feeling the power that flowed through its wooden length. "Nothing lasts unchanged," she replied with newfound wisdom. "But change need not be feared." She placed her grandfather's eagle feather, now restored to him, at the base of the growing tree. The whispers were gone, replaced by a gentle rustling of leaves. What had once been malevolent was now transformed, not tamed, but balanced, bound in mutual respect rather than forced subjugation. Morning Feather looked to the horizon, her eyes seeing beyond the physical landscape to the possibilities that lay ahead. She was still a child in years, but now also the guardian of an ancient secret, carrying both the innocence of youth and the wisdom of ages within her transformed soul.